Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Second Chance. This evening, my guest will be Mr. Carson Dean, the Executive Director of the Men's Shelter of Charlotte. Sit back, grab your paper and pencil, and enjoy the show. We'll be back in just a second. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Second Chance. This evening, my guest will be Mr. Carson Dean, who's the Executive Director of the Men's Shelter of Charlotte. How you doing, Mr. Dean?
Very good, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself and the Men's Shelter of Charlotte.
Well, I've been in Charlotte now for just a little more than a year, but for the last decade, I've been working on ending homelessness around North Carolina. And I was invited here a little more than a year ago to become the executive director of what was then the Uptown Shelter. And just back in October, we took the Uptown Shelter and the Emergency Winter Shelter, both serving homeless men, and merged them together into one agency, which is now known as the Men's Shelter of Charlotte.
How long has the Men's Shelter of Charlotte been in existence?
Well, as a combined agency since October 1 of this year, the Emergency Winter Shelter was started back in 1981 when 3 homeless men froze to death on the street. The community, churches, and concerned citizens and government officials got together and created that winter overflow shelter. And then in 1985, just because of the growing homelessness issue in Charlotte, the Uptown Shelter was started first as a day shelter for all homeless people, and then later became an overnight shelter for homeless men.
How do you get the funding for your facility?
Yeah, that's a yearly challenge.
Sir.
I mean, especially in this economy, we rely heavily on individual donors. We also have a lot of churches and congregations that support us each year, whether through gifts or by including us in their missions. We do get some government funding, and we are also a United Way member agency. So we get a significant amount of money from the United Way, but as you well know, that's been a bigger challenge this year than in most years.
Homelessness, that seems to be a big issue in our society today. What makes the Men's Shelter so valuable to this community?
Well, there's a couple things. One is we have moved away from the old concept of a homeless shelter being a place that we just provide a meal and a cot and nothing more, because that helps that man for that night, but all that does is help him for that night. What we really do is take a streets to housing approach, and we use the shelter as a vehicle. So part of our job is to encourage men who are homeless to come in off the streets into the shelter for their basic needs, food and clothing and showers and a place to sleep. But then we start to engage with them, and we offer them services, including case management services, that help them really start focusing on, well, what are their barriers to getting back on their feet in the community? And not just identifying those things, but then helping them figure out what to do next. And then when those guys are ready, then we help them find an appropriate place to live and help them move out of the shelter. And as long as we need to, we'll continue to help provide them some support so they don't have to come back to the shelter.
I know there's a big thing with that overcrowdedness within probably the shelter and all that. How do you handle that situation?
Well, the reality in Charlotte right now is we have the Men's Shelter of Charlotte is the only emergency shelter for men. In the wintertime, we have about 500 beds. We'll sleep about 600 on average this winter. Putting people on the floor. We can even use a local school to help. Year-round, in the past, we've only had about 260 beds. Those other men didn't all of a sudden not become homeless anymore. And so we're committed, when the weather is dangerous, in the winter and in the summer, not to turn anyone away. So we would rather have the house be a little bit crowded and men be off the streets and be safe and being helped than to just make sure we fill our beds and kind of say we've got enough. But that does create some challenges, and fortunately we have a very dedicated professional staff that's working round the clock 7 days a week. We also have the help of over 2,000 volunteers each year to do things like help us serve meals and be in the shelter and do programs and classes that allow us to really have the people available to help the men that do come in the building. But as long as the issue of homelessness is as serious as it is in Charlotte, we're going to stay crowded.
Do you think we take the issue of homelessness as serious as it could be because of the fact that we have a home and we're not homeless? I mean, as far as providing the funds and stuff like that?
You know, that's a really good question. I think there's a couple of ways to answer that. One is I do think there are a lot of people in our community, and this is around the country as
Right.
well, who look at homelessness as a personal failing. And so then they look at it and say, well, you did this to yourself, so you should do something about it yourself. What we really know, and we also hear a lot about, well, people are homeless because they drink, because they use drugs,
Substance abuse.
because they're mentally ill. People aren't homeless because of those reasons. People are homeless because they don't have the support system that you and I have. When things get tough, if things got really tough for me tonight, I could think of 5 or 10 people I could turn to right now and say, help me. My family, friends, church, those things. The guys that we serve, at some point that system, that support system, either was never there or has gone away. Now maybe that mental illness caused that support system to fall apart.
Correct.
Or maybe the drinking or the drug use caused the family to say no more, we've had enough, and that kind of exacerbated it. But it's that lack of support system, and I think people truly don't understand that. I think people don't understand how closely homelessness is tied to poverty. You know, how many people we have in our community who are truly living one paycheck away from maybe not being on the street, but having their house foreclosed on, having the landlord tell them to get out, you know, those kinds of things. But it's because of that support system that it doesn't become so serious that they end up in a shelter. Well, more and more people now, it is becoming that serious and they're ending up in a shelter. So I think we still have a long way to go in educating the community about what homelessness truly is. It isn't that stereotypical bum on the corner asking for 50 cents to go get a bottle of liquor.
Correct.
It isn't that mentally ill, deranged man who's who's robbing a store or beating up somebody. I'm not saying those people don't exist in homelessness, but they exist in society. Most of our folks are hardworking people who have had some bad turns in life that have been serious enough to cause them to have to turn to somebody else for help.
That's a big thing that I see. How about building that self-esteem on that individual? I know he has to be really down, being that he doesn't have that home and that type of situation. How do you build that self-esteem on that individual?
Yeah, well, that's a big part of it because for most of these guys, they're on the brink of completely losing hope. And so one of the things that we do as an agency is try to help them understand that there is hope available. And we do that in a lot of different ways. And we don't go to guys and just sit down and say, we need to talk about your self-esteem. You know, we got to build that up for you. Right. We really do it very subtle. We have lots of volunteers that come in, and we have a yoga instructor that comes in and does yoga classes with the guys. We have volunteers that come in, and each week we have an African American history class in the building. We have support groups and those kinds of things. But more than anything, we have lots of volunteers. We have a caring staff, but we have lots of volunteers who, by just walking in the door each day, wanting to help and smiling to that person and saying hello, the guys know that the community does support them. Not in a financial way, but they support the fact that this is a fellow citizen, a fellow human being who right now happens to be hurting. And sometimes the most I can do is give them a smile and a kind word. That goes such a long way towards helping keep that hope from completely disappearing. Then when we need to, we get all the clinical things involved, mental health counseling, substance abuse treatment, all of those things that also help kind of build up that self-esteem. But a lot of it is just in the way we approach the men that we serve. We don't call the men that we serve clients. We call them guests. They're welcome to come to our place. They're our guests. We want them to be there. We want them to feel at home. We want it to be a temporary place for them.
Okay, so it is a temporary. How long can they stay in your facility?
We do that on an individual basis. It just depends on the needs. For example, we have a substance abuse treatment program on site that Mecklenburg County runs. It runs for 42 days. So if that guy comes in and joins that program, we know he's going to stay with us at least 42 days to complete the program. Okay. We may have somebody disability trying to navigate the disability process. Well, that process for someone who's homeless can take 18 months or more. And so if that person has nowhere else to go, we're not going to come up on some artificial deadline and say you have to go. We're going to work with you as long as you're working with us. And as long as you're working towards that goal, we're going to make sure that you have a safe place to stay.
That's one of the key things. The thing that really impressed me about the guys, because I know that a lot of people would prefer, instead of being out on the streets, commit a crime. And I see these individuals, what they do is they're willing to still try to be a productive member of society, and they don't have to go to that criminal type behavior in order to make it. And that's really good. That's a positive thing that I see, that they still have that hope.
Absolutely. And we, you know, and there's often a lot of talk about we need to help guys get back in the community and be productive members again. You know, a lot of our guys are productive members of society while they're in the shelter.
Correct.
Advocating on behalf of fellow homeless citizens, doing things like, we got a lot of our guys will volunteer to go to other nonprofit agencies and spend their time helping. When they did the program over the summer for homeless women and children called Hall House,
Okay.
a lot of our guys volunteer their times to go over there and clean those apartments to get them ready for women to move into. So yeah, we really try to instill that you're part of this community. You have a responsibility to the community as well. And as long as you're living up to your end of the bargain, we're going to do everything we can to help you.
Do you partner with a lot of other different organizations, you know, as far as getting that yes to another type of situation? I mean, in addition to yours.
Absolutely. Mecklenburg County, their substance abuse program, Department of Social Services works in our facility with us. We have volunteer dentists that do a dental clinic. C.W. Williams, which is a community health clinic, comes in and does the nurses clinic in our facility. Crisis Assistance Ministry, Friendship. I mean, there's, I know I'm going to leave somebody out, but there's literally dozens of different nonprofits, government agencies, in addition to the faith community. There are dozens of churches who every night of the year come in and help prepare and serve the evening meal. In addition to that, there are lots of businesses who come in and help prepare and serve the lunchtime meal. I mean, we've got a lot of people. One of our big in-kind supporters right now is Family Dollar stores. Once a quarter, they send a big truck over, and they donate things that is hard for us to buy, and it's also difficult for us to get people to donate, like 50-pound bags of sugar and cases of toilet paper. So Family Dollar has really stepped up and said, we'll help support what you do in that way.
And that has to really make you, as the executive director, know that there are people who are willing to help individuals get themselves back together again.
Absolutely. You know what? I wouldn't do this if I felt like I had to do it all by myself. Or there's no way that our agency, as strong as it is with the dedicated people that we have, there's no way that as an agency we could do this alone. If the community's not supporting what we're doing, not only financially, but also through volunteer efforts and through just their general support, we wouldn't exist. There's no way that we would be able to be successful. So it's through all of that partnership and through seeing the impact that it has on those guys' life, that's what excites me and motivates me every morning to get up and come in and do what I can.
Where do you see the men's shelter 5 years from now? What do you vision?
When we did the merger, we made a commitment to the community, and there's three parts to it. We said that, number one, we are going to be the safety net in this community for men experiencing homelessness. That means we're going to identify where the gaps are in the service delivery system, and we're going to work with others to fill those gaps, to make sure nobody drops through the cracks. Secondly, we committed that we're going to ensure that there's an adequate supply of shelter beds for men, so that we don't have men having to sleep on the street in our community. And then thirdly, we said we're going to continue to work with other agencies and work on best practices to make sure the men get the support that they need so they can move beyond homelessness. And in doing that, we've said a couple things. One of our first immediate goals is to be able to provide at least 500 beds of shelter every night year-round, not just in the wintertime. More importantly, within the next 5 years, we're going to build a homeless transition center that's going to have a single campus, that's going to have enough emergency shelter beds, the program and transitional housing that that's a gap in our community right now that they need, as well as more space so that our partners can come in, bring in their expertise, and have a place to work from so that we can more efficiently serve men that are experiencing homelessness in our community and help them move beyond that.
Okay, where are you located at, and is that the only facility that you have?